Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kristen Brogdon, and I am Northrop's Director of Programming. The University of Minnesota Spotlight Series is a collaborative partnership between the Institute for Advanced Study, the University Honors Program, and Northrop to present lectures, panel discussions, exhibits, and other events throughout the academic year around timely topics of interest. The six-part 2021-22 series, hosted in partnership with the Minnesota Humanities Center, focuses on patriotism, public service, and civic engagement. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that whether you are here on campus or with us online, we are all located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus resides on Dakota land, ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. We acknowledge this place has a complex and layered history. This land acknowledgement is one of the ways in which we work to educate the campus and community about this land and our relationships with it and each other. The IAS, Northrop, and UHP are committed to ongoing efforts to recognize, support, and advocate for American Indian nations and peoples. I also acknowledge that today is Veterans Day, and we are grateful to all of our service people, past and present, for their service and sacrifices. Before we get much further into the program, I want to offer a few technical instructions for our audience members. We do have a captioner working with us today. To enable captions, click on the live transcription button, commonly located in the bottom Zoom menu bar if you're on a desktop computer, or in the top right menu if you're on a mobile device. Then select Show Subtitles. We will be using Slido to facilitate our audience Q&A today. You can submit questions anytime during our program. Attendees in person can use their smartphones and go to www.slido.com and enter Spotlight Series. Zoom attendees check the chat for a direct link to our Slido page. Please note that questions can be submitted anonymously, and we encourage you to upvote previously submitted questions to ensure we address questions based on audience interest priority. Our moderator for today and for the Spotlight series is Kevin Lindsey, CEO for the Minnesota Humanities Center. He is a widely respected advocate and lawyer with a wealth of experience in public policy and education reform. A proven change maker, Kevin's career focuses on finding solutions to complex issues for institutions. He has a passion for inclusion for all, building a stronger democracy, and leveraging the power of personal stories. Kevin has held numerous governmental and nonprofit positions, such as board chair and interim executive director of Walker West Music Academy, and most recently serving as the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights from 2011 to 2019. It's now my pleasure to introduce our three panelists for today. Pauline Kim Harris is a music director, violinist, and composer, and a Grammy-nominated violinist and composer. The youngest student of legendary violinist Jascha Heifetz, she has appeared throughout the US, Canada, Europe, Asia, and Australia as a soloist, collaborator, and music director. Known for her work with the classical avant-punk violin duo String Noise, she has also toured extensively with Orpheus Chamber Orchestra and continues to collaborate with leading new music ensembles in New York City. Kim Harris was the first music director for Bill T. Jones' Arnie Zane Company and has been the featured artist for choreographers David Parker and Pam Tanowitz. As a composer, Kim Harris deconstructs and re-embodies the tactile connection between memory and sound. She has recorded for Exotic, Nonesuch, Northern Spy, Mode, Cold Blue, and Black Truffle Records, among others. Her debut album, Heroine, a reimagining of the Bach Chaconne and Ockegham's Deo Gratias, was released on Sono Luminous. And she just released the second album in the trilogy, Wild at Heart, which are reincarnations of the Chaconne by four contemporary composers. Marie Lloyd Paspe is a native of Singapore and the Philippines who grew up in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and Bellingham, Massachusetts. She received her early dance training from Jessica Wilson at Metro West Ballet and graduated summa cum laude from the Ailey Fordham BFA program in 2016. Studying dance performance and business administration. In 2015, she studied abroad in Israel at Kibbutz Contemporary Dance Company's International Dance Program, where she also premiered her first work. She attended Springboard Dance Montreal in 2017, performing works in progress by Peter Chu and Eva Kolarova. Currently, she teaches Pilates and dance, collaborates and choreographs, and freelances commercial modeling. Ms. Paspe joined the company in 2018. And finally, Janet Wong, who is the Associate Artistic Director of New York Live Arts, was born in Hong Kong and trained in Hong Kong and London. Upon graduation, she joined the Berlin Ballet, where she first met Bill T. Jones when he was invited to choreograph for the company. In 1993, she moved to New York to pursue other interests. Wong became rehearsal director of Bill T. Jones' Arnie Zane Company in 1996, associate artistic director in 2006, and associate artistic director of New York Live Arts in 2016. Please join me in a warm welcome for our three guests and our moderator, and I will hand it over now to Janet Wong. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Just to contextualize a little bit, the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company merged with a performance space called Dance Theater Workshop in New York that was founded in 1965 and became New York Live Arts. So we are the resident company of New York Live Arts. And hence I have two, a title that spans both places. Anyway, so since I'm the person that's been in the company the longest, I'm going to give you a little context, a little story about the company. Some of you may know or may not know. Did anyone see the performance last night? Nobody? Yeah, one? So I can't see, so bright the lights. I'm like talking into the void. I used to be a performer, so I'm like, oh, I'm not used to lights anymore. So the company was founded in 1982, the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company. So next year we're celebrating our 40th anniversary. So to survive as a company for 40 years, that's some kind of achievement, right? In a world that does not always value the arts. Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane met in college in the 70s. And Bill I should have a deck and slideshows prepared, but I don't. So you have to Google or use your imagination. Bill, 6'1", African American. Arnie Zane, Jewish Italian American, 5'4". Bill was a theater major and an athlete, and Arnie Zane was a photographer, and he was also a brown belt karate master. He did not get the black belt because he could not deal with the authority of the master over him. So he's just like, okay, I'm giving up. And he was very talented. So Bill discovered modern dance in college, and Arnie followed. And they were, I won't go into it, but they discovered this dance form called contact improvisation, wherein it's a very democratic way of partnering. In ballet, the man is always lifting the woman, and always, cavalier, prince, whatever. In contact improvisation, the 5'4" person can lift using leverage, gravity, can lift the 6'1" person. And so it's like they want to say as a democratic way of partnering. We are not assigned to the roles according to your body size and shape. And so they, fast forward a little bit, they were living together in a commune. They joined a little collective, and they started making work up there in SUNY Binghamton, or in that area, Johnson City. It's like 3 hours away from New York City. I like to think that, I'm not a historian or a scholar, I like to think that because they were making work away from the New York City Mecca, their work was very different from what was being made at the time in New York City. So when they came to New York City, finally, they exploded on the scene, and people have not seen something like this. The two men thought they were just being, fierce makers. Their influences were very broad, like avant-garde cinema. Judson Church just happened. Judson Church, like the likes of Yvonne Rainer, the No Manifesto, or Steve Paxton, the founder of Contact Improvisation, wherein anything you can use pedestrian movement as performance, as dance. instead of just, the very trained ballet or Alvin Ailey, Martha Graham. So they had that freedom coming into it. They were also a gay couple, a biracial gay couple making work on a stage that has not seen that kind of work. So they thought they were just being fierce artists. They were also very influenced by avant-garde cinema, by visual art, by literature, by pop culture. So all of that came into their work. But of course, what they were doing while they were making that work and performing that work was, two men performing intimacy. I don't mean sex, I just mean performing, touching, grappling with each other, and then dropping into an intimate conversation on stage. People have not seen that. And a black man and a white man performing together, also a little bit rare at the time. You have the black dance, and then you have the rest of them, So in that sense, they were kind of already changing the landscape of performance and dance without planning to do it. They were not doing it as protest or anything. But while they were living in that, commune, they lived upstairs, they rolled downstairs, and they did their, rehearsal and made work, and then they would go off to do their day job. Bill's day job was stuffing adult diapers in a senior home. And they would come home one day, and then someone had spray painted faggots, go home, on their, in front of their building. So they were living in that moment where you had to just live and clean up the wall, go on, next day. So, and then 1982, sorry, I'm gonna be a little bit quicker, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. In 1982, Bill and Arnie formed the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company. And they left that little collective, and they didn't move all the way to New York City. They moved to Valley Cottage, where Bill still lives now, with his husband, Bjorn Amelan. Bill and Arnie wanted to form a company. They wanted the company to resemble the world, the cross-section of the world that they want to live in, not the world as it was in 1982. So it was always a very diverse group of people, even in body shapes and size. And so fast forward many years, now we are in 1988. Arnie Zane died of AIDS. This was during the height of the AIDS epidemic, right? And Arnie Zane was probably one of the first artists to come out openly and say that he has AIDS, because at the time, that was a big stigma. People knew so little about AIDS. They were ostracized and isolated when they needed help and care the most. So Arnie Zane actually did a very well-known CBS interview, and I think you can find it in the library somewhere, where he talked about, I have AIDS. And in 1988, he passed away surrounded by, in the bedroom that he shared with Bill in Valley Cottage, surrounded by, of course, Bill was there, and the company around him. Bill wanted to not continue the company because, well, I don't need to say more about that. But he did, because the company was the child that this gay couple could not have at the time. So the company was something that they made together. This was their child. So Bill kept the company going. And believe me, even throughout my 25 years with the company, there were moments when Bill said, no, why am I keeping a company? It's too much work, too painful. The world is a struggle. You need to maintain a company. It's a commitment, right? People do companies, as some of you may know, is kind of old-fashioned now, because there is a commitment to a community of people. You provide them with salary, you provide them with health care. Why not just do a pickup company, right? That would be so much easier. But we stay committed to the company, and we have new generation. Some of the dancers on tour in this company joined 3 months ago. So the story continues. And then I'm going to jump forward to right now. We are here with a piece called Afterwardsness that was created during the twin pandemics, Bill likes to call it. COVID and racial injustice the twin pandemics. And the piece premiered. The piece had a fake premiere in October of 2020. We started rehearsing this work in September of that year, thinking that the Armory gave us commission, thinking that, oh, by October, so we'll be able to gather and have a real audience. No, we didn't. So we had a soft premiere. We had an invited audience in the house, and then this past spring in May, we finally premiered it in May of 2021. So we actually have a little video to show. This was made in the January of this year for the APAP conference. APAP it stands for American Performing Arts Professionals. There you go. It's a conference for performing arts in the United States. So I wanted to contextualize it because Bill talks about, he's talking to presenters. Which of you are interested in presenting the work? This may be some way we can do it. You will see the performance here was created for the Park Avenue Armory, which was a drill hall that's converted into a performance space. It's 250 feet by 150 feet. It's immense. It was conceived as a socially distanced piece. The audience you'll see is seated 11 feet apart. And the performers never partner, never touch. You know how I said the company was founded on contact improvisation, where Bill and Arnie were partnering? That's one of our, specialty, partnering. No partnering in this piece, no touching. We keep our mask on the whole time, so very much of the era, right? So can you roll the video, please? Thank you.
Hello, Bill T. Jones here. Thank you very much for your interest in our work, and in particular, the newest work, which was called Afterwardsness. Strange title, isn't it? This title actually comes from some research I was doing in psychotherapy, and I was overhearing the conversation between an artist and a psychotherapist, where they casually mentioned a Freudian term, afterwardsness. It seems that this is a term that therapists use in describing that period necessary when a person who is a victim of abuse, usually sexual abuse, some sort of physical abuse, that period necessary for that person to be able to reapproach it, or at least to trigger an opening response to it after they've been, quote, shut down. People ask me, why did I make this work? Here was an opportunity that presented itself at a time when we were just ready for it. Our friends at the Armory have become de facto collaborators as we were working diligently toward our new work, our other new work, Deep Blue Sea, and all work on it had to be halted, so the project was put off indefinitely. You can imagine we were distressed. We were able to keep all of our company employed. We were able to keep our organization going. The theater was closed down, New York Live Arts. And Janet Wong, my associate director, had the brilliant idea that not only would people be kept on salary, but they should be actually given assignments. They kept them in touch with the company, with the work, by going back through the repertory of phrase material, of which there is so much, that I had generated on my own body. These pieces, going back to works by Bill and Arnie, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Still Here, my breathing show, a solo show that I made, lots of material was generated on my body. Very formal exercises that ultimately were at the service of emotional works of a very specific era, oftentimes informed by the very specific nature of who the company was. Michael Lornigan contacted us to say that they were at the Armory trying to think of how they were going to slowly reopen. And I think I offered the term thaw their programming. They asked if I would be interested in joining a group of artists, and we would each have a few evenings and in their glorious space, very low tech, at least I remember it being very low tech, very small audience, and really tightly controlled around what we were being allowed to participate in.
March 18th.
I thought, why don't we actually make an immersive environment? In other words, I didn't really want that proscenium feeling that the audience sits here and they watch us do what we had to do. I wanted them to understand the way that I'm thinking about movement in the world right now. In a world that is asking questions about what color your body is, what gender your body is, what is your economic status, what area of the country you live in. All these things are in the bodies, but somehow they're in the piece. You, as the audience, are the conductor. Where you look, what you listen to in this vast landscape of events and personalities is the truth of the piece.
May 5th.
Another man done gone. Another man done gone. Another man done gone from the county farm. Another man done gone. I didn't know his name.
So, Afterwardsness was the framework, the conceptual framework, because at that time, like so many people, I was hoping that this thing we call the pandemic now, which actually became twin pandemics with the brutal murder and highly broadcast death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, I thought that we would be on the other side of it by the autumn. But as we all know, that was not the case. So Afterwardsness is a bit of a wishful title. When will we be after this? We were looking for something to hang it on other than this vague feeling of release, that we could be together again, and that we could come to grips with what had been going on with the Black Lives Matter discussion. How could we find a way, the way that art presents, for us to talk about those different versions of alienation and need that can only be answered in the public realm?
July 10th.
I'm trying to think differently about how a work like Afterwardsness can find its audience nationally, internationally. We've talked about things like a bus tour. All the fears that you share as well, we have, but we have got to break out. We've got to take this message of real-time performance, real-time in space. We've got to get it out to audiences. Do we arrive in a bus in your community? Do you provide us with a big open gymnasium? And And we invite people to come into this space and rediscover that experience that our audience felt at the Armory. I don't have the answers yet how it's done, but that's what we're asking you for right now. You want to be around the table with us, figuring out how each one of these stops on our tour will be personalized for you and your community. Not much more to say right now, but we're really thankful for your attention, and we hope that we can bring afterwardsness to your community. Thank you very much.
October 17th.
That's all. We actually did a bus tour 2 weeks ago in a gymnasium, performed in a gymnasium.
Well, we're going to have to follow up on that. So first off, Janet, thank you very much for that. I think you gave us a great frame. And what we'll do for the audience members that are new, I'm going to ask a couple of questions here. Please feel free to send a question into Slido, and then I will reserve some time to take audience questions and then ask that of the panel, so please send those questions in. So how was it riding on a bus and doing a bus tour?
Oh, Marie, what do you think? Pauline?
It was, we were going from New York to Massachusetts, and we hit up 2 cities in Massachusetts on this bus tour. So thankfully it wasn't too long, but it was definitely a fun time. Yeah, we were, how many people were on the bus? It was 9 performers, 4 musicians.
15 people.
About
on the
15
bus.
on a coach bus, and taking the piece on the road felt very much like this time, this pandemic time. Like we were in a pod, we brought the pod on a bus, the bus went to Massachusetts, and we stayed relatively in a pod. Yeah.
The most challenging thing about performing in gymnasiums is that there's no technical capabilities or very little, so you have to bring the lights in, few lights. At Northrop, we actually have a lot of lights and amazing sound system, so it's a small version of what you saw, but the lighting designer was able to replicate what he did. It's our first tour since February of 2020. So we're like, oh my God, how do you do things? What to pack? What to
So there was a word that was mentioned, phrases. So for those of us who aren't familiar in the world of dance, what does that mean when you say phrases?
Movement phrases is chaining together of movement. It's like words, they become a sentence. The sentence becomes a paragraph. So a paragraph of movement is a phrase, like a sentence, it's a phrase, yeah. So for what we do, it's abstract movement. So oftentimes it's just the arrangement of your skeleton in time and place, you know.
So it feels to me that this company is really close. I mean, telling the story, most companies probably would be surprised if the CEO was about to pass on, and then the whole company would gather around her bed at that moment. But that doesn't seem like that would be unusual for any of you within the company. I feel sort of a unique closeness. Pauline, as someone new, relatively new within, is you're bringing music into this space. How was it joining the company, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, so I guess the very first time I experienced the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company must have been for, a 6-week tour to Europe.
Yes. Pauline has been with us, actually working with us since quite a long time, on and off, since like
yes.
2012?
12, I think it
12,
was, yeah.
13-ish, yeah.
So I was brought on as the music director. I didn't actually perform, but this collaboration calls for me to do sort of almost all the wonderful things as a music director, as a performer, and as a composer. So I think this work in itself is very unique for so many reasons, but in understanding what those roles were and how to navigate. And most of how this was created was by listening and by observing and by taking in and filling in the spaces. So Bill, when shortly after the killing of George Floyd, I was in contact with Bill T. Jones, and he expressed that they had just been received this opportunity, and he wanted to talk more, but I didn't really know what was in store for me. He did mention that there is an iconic work that he would like to implement as the backbone, and it's a classical work by Olivier Messiaen, who wrote this piece called The Quartet for the End of Time, which is an 8-movement work for piano, clarinet, cello, and violin. It was composed in, he was a prisoner of war, but it was a war camp where he was in the company of a few other musicians, and that was what was available to them, was a violin and clarinet.
During World War II, right?
It was World War I, actually. I think it's before, so 40, around that time. Yeah, it wasn't concentration camp, so it was a different.
What year was it composed?
So basically, he made this piece out of just not like the ideal, but like creating something with what was available to him. And from that work, Bill chose 3 of the movements, which features just the clarinet, the violin, and piano, and cello. And basically, long story short, all the sounds that you hear throughout the work is a collective of what the performers, dancers were also working on. So you hear them pounding the floor, calling out the names, all sorts of things that we actually collected into creating the soundscape of one of the pieces that's called Valley Cottage, I think, is at the moment. Yes, and it's a very intense moment, and it's really incredible to watch because I realized that it was the collective force of everyone's creativity and contribution that made that work happen, with Bill's directive, of course, but and then the dates that take us through the course. But the thing about the work is that even though it's this multidimensional, and it starts in this historic place of Olivier Messiaen, but then it's also current. There's these multi-levels of just time passing but freezing, and it's all your personal perception and input that create the experience night after night. So each performance is very different depending on who is in attendance, right? So that energy feeds into that performance, which is also part of the musical experience because it is the space that you're holding, as they say. And
Yeah, I really appreciate that background. I mean, the music is very haunting. And when you're observing and seeing and being in that space, you're really moved by it. And then it's even more powerful, the idea of somebody thinking of that, composing it in their head as a prisoner of war, just takes it to a whole different level. There's a piece in the work called Homage. Could you speak to that?
Sure. So I'm completely blown away and inspired by the fact that this work originated with these phrases that were, I mean, I didn't know this till recently, but were made for Bill. Like, Bill made these. And for Janet to have the insight to keep the company engaged. Unlike the company, I did not touch my violin from March 13 or whenever that was. I just felt paralyzed. You know, I didn't know what was, it was just a strange time. There was nothing to process. And then when George Floyd was killed, I lost it. Completely lost it. You know when you just want to scream? Have you just screamed? Like Yoko Ono has this piece where she just says, okay, everyone in the room, just scream as loud as you can. But sometimes you can't scream out loud, right? It's so internal. And shortly after that, there was an online memorial service that I attended online. And they had a moment of silence. That was exactly, at that time, the duration of what it took to kill George Floyd. So, I can't remember the actual timeline of like when, what happened, what. I just know that Friday morning, I was compelled to take the violin out of my violin case, and I didn't even tune it. I just played. But I chose, so at the time it was also, there's so much like Zoom, like do something from home, give us, you know, like play from your house, like all this stuff, but like I couldn't do it. I couldn't get myself to do it. But for some reason that morning, I recorded myself playing this improvisation.
Right.
And didn't know, I just did it, put it away. And later, I mean, long story short, I had the opportunity to continue the conversation with Bill, and I shared it with him. And we talked more about it, and then the meeting was set up with Janet and everybody at NYLA, and I was invited to take part in creating this work. And I did not know even until then how this work was going to be incorporated or if it was going to be a part of the piece at all.
So,
And I don't know. I still don't know why Bill chose me, a 4'10" Korean girl, to like step up there and do this.
well, I think anybody who's heard you play knows the answer to that. So, Marie, to this piece though, as dancers, in what I have read of Bill, there is a teaching of nuance and the physicality and the emotion of the time in which he is moving his body. How was that in a Zoom world? How did he infuse that, share what he was trying to convey to you as a dancer?
I think this question speaks outside the Zoom world too. I've been in the company for, this is my 4th season, so about 3.5 years, a little over than 3.5 years. I think the way that nuance is taught or passed down, how the child of Arnie and Bill is passed down to the current generation is from a place of storytelling. Much like how Janet shared with us in the beginning, the ways in which Bill and Arnie had a relationship, the ways in which they created together, and that informs us as well. It informs the current company, the current people who witness the work. I think it's from a place of information passing. And I think Janet is one of the pillars of this information passing as well, Bill and Janet together. How describing a certain movement or how describing the context of when a phrase was made, the story behind a phrase that is titled Nebraska. My favorite story is that this phrase was made by Bill in the basement, if I recall correctly, and there was protest happening outside the theater that Bill was creating this phrase by. So knowing the context of this certain phrase in the moment creates, I think for me, this sense of the sense of like, I think it's the sensibility of what nuance can be, or sense of detail of what a certain movement can be. Because in the company, when things are taught to us, it's from a place of abstraction. It's from a place of authenticity, of what the skeleton can do, of what the body is capable of. And there is no meaning, per se, for each movement that we are taught, but there is a context of which that movement was created, or a reference of how that movement was put in the body by Bill. So I think with that, there is the past, the storytelling, the context of the past, but also in that there is coming into it from the present. Like my body doing this work feels obviously very different than what I'm seeing of the originator of the phrase, but how I can merge the past context with my present experience is part of that nuance in storytelling.
No, I appreciate that.
Can
So-
I just jump in for a
Please.
second?
Yeah.
You know, the skeletal work of the body, you know, the abstract movement, and that Bill making this phrase called Nebraska in the basement when the company was performing a piece called Still Here, and in Kansas, and the Reverend, what's his name? Phelps? Organize a protest, and the mother of one of the performers organized a counter protest. So on one side is Bill T. Jones equals 666 equals devil equals death equals gay equals AIDS, you know, all of that. And then on the other side, the mother was, and the friends were counter protesting, and the audience had to go through the middle. And Bill in the basement, he was not in that piece. Still Here, you can Google what that piece was. It was made in 1994, and it was about survival. And it was at the end, 1994 was when the drug was passed by FDA, right? The AIDS cocktail. Anyway, Bill went down to the basement and created this phrase, looking back, looking deep, investigating deeply into his body, going inside the personal, what he has. The world outside may or may not be in his body. And what I wanted to add is that we make work, this work that we bring is, there's no text, there's no specificity of language or storytelling. Even when we use language, it's never linear. It's always kind of, you know, here. And associating with the movement you see. But the abstraction in the dance, the abstraction in the body, because it is the human body, every time you perform it, whether you're having a good day or a bad day, whether you just fell in love or your father just passed away, is experienced very differently. So if we're lucky and we have that kind of artist that is transparent and fluid, all of that gets channeled into the body. So when you drop an arm, oh shit, I'm gonna hurt myself. When you drop an arm, it feels, you know, when you drop an arm, it may recall that moment of sadness or loss, or it may recall, fuck it, I'm just giving up, or it may recall anything, but it's not imposed from the outside. It can be. And I'm sure it's similar to music, how you play a certain note on a certain day. In the company, the way we make work, we want all the dancers and musicians are collaborators. We come into the studio, do not leave some of your world outside, but come in as your full self. Come in with all your experiences, whether you just came from a protest on the street, bring that into the work and put that into doing this abstract movement. What does that look like or feel like? Put that into running across the stage. Put that into your negotiation with your fellow performers. How do we take care of everyone? How do we take care of our own performance in any given moment, and also the entire stage of people? How do I connect with Marie? I'm not a performer. but how do I connect with my fellow performers so that I take care of the whole piece? So in a very convoluted way, I want to say that, I'm trying to say that this embodied experience, I wish everyone can experience that. I get mad when I get off the trains in New York subway where people just stand there and not caring about people behind you or next to you, in front of you. Like, can we experience the world in an embodied way so that I actually feel you and see you, and what I do may affect what you do? And I feel like that's what we are negotiating all the time in the work we do, whether it's this abstract work made during a pandemic or twin pandemics, or a piece that's about Abraham Lincoln, you know, so.
No, I really appreciate that. I mean, most linguists would tell you that you can hear the words that I'm saying,
Right.
but the body language is just important, if not more important, and you're actually picking up more cues than the words, right? And the same thing with music, right? A little faster, a little slower, a little heavier on a note
Yeah.
conveys a lot.
Maybe that's our form, you know, when we saw the title of the talk, Activism and Patriotism, we're like, we don't do protest work per se, but everything we do is in define of something, I feel like. Bill would say that he thinks of making art as pushing against something, as pushing against something. Maybe it's old-fashioned way of thinking about art making, but there's something that he's struggling against all his life. I mean, just the two of them performing themselves on stage is, in 1982 or 1980, was a way of saying to the world, here I am. I will not leave, accept who I am, you know.
Right,
who
I
we
just want to
are.
add to that and just say as artists that you're not creating something with a purposeful destination of what that is going to do. We create that space for you, the audience, to then activate and keep live and to deliver the message. It's up to you as the audience to receive it. And what we do is we just embody our experiences into our art, and that represents time. Over time, it represents history, you know, and that all comes together to become whatever it is that we want to call it.
No, I appreciate that. So let me take a couple questions here from the audience, and then we'll come back here. But please feel free, as audience members, to send additional questions, and then we'll try to get as many of those questions answered. And I really appreciate the conversation that we're having here. So one of the questions, kind of picking up on the last bit of our conversation, would you say that making contemporary dance and music is an inherently political act? Because it's raising a voice, it's showing a mirror, it's a way of articulating your role within society.
I personally don't think so. I think people can go into the studio and make beauty, and maybe that's also radical nowadays. If you make something of beauty, is that valid? Will you be funded if it's not about some, you know, social justice issue? So I like to think that you can make any kind of art, whether people want to see it or not, or whether people can, you know, relate to it or not. Is something. It's a different question.
Marie, what do you think? You're kind of looking at the notes here.
No, I'm thinking how it's also the responsibility of the audience as well. Trying to understand what I'm thinking also is like Janet said, we can go into the studio, create something beautiful. How does that look on my body? And if I give this movement to someone else who does not look like me, what does that say about that person? It can be very singular. It can also be very unrelated. But to an audience, what does a sequence of movement, a phrase, look like in my body versus it looking like on somebody else? And I think the meaning, whether it's a meaning I'm intending or the creator's intending or the performer's intending, I think it's also about the way in which the eye of the audience is viewing that too. So in terms of political, being a political, or thinking of it in a political lens, that feels a little contrived. That word, politics, feels contrived. But there is something in the lens of viewing that I think shifts, it can shift the meaning or shift the way in which a performer performs it, or the way in which the eye interprets it.
Yeah, I just want to say that as performers and artists, I think what we really want to do is present a way of pushing, as Bill says, but also like giving you a chance to think about something differently, like by experiencing it, right? So all these different, depending on who's performing or what, the interpretations will always be unique. But the experience of what you take away from it, were you challenged? Are you thinking about these things that we were feeling, that we were showing through our performance? I don't know, I just wanted to add that.
I think I know what the answer to this question is, but I'll ask this. Is there movement from still here in the new piece? And did the shared experience of the AIDS epidemic inform the new work?
Yes, there is a phrase performed by Naya Oprong from Still Here. It is the soul of Odiran Adelaide, this beautiful, beautiful performer. So yes, I didn't get the second part of the question.
Unfortunately, the question
Something
just
about-
went away. I think it was about the AIDS pandemic impact this piece.
Well, Bill likes to say that this is a second pandemic. So in that sense, yes, and from a different perspective, no. But we were making this piece during a pandemic, so just coming to work is, very different from pre-pandemic era. I mean, we were very lucky and very privileged to have this commission from the Park Avenue Armory, where we've been rehearsing in person. We didn't rehearse on Zoom at all because I didn't want to rehearse on Zoom.
Why didn't you want to perform on Zoom? It seems like there's a story
Well,
there.
we did things on Zoom. Like we did
Right.
things not on Zoom though. We met every week on
Right.
Zoom. We kept the company. We paid the company all through the pandemic, and we met once a week on Zoom. And oh my God, seeing their little squares on the screen, and some of them are in tears, not knowing what's going on. Some of them are back home with their family.
I
we just
also
didn't want
heard
to
that there were
rehearse
some on rooftops. Is there any
So
truth
there
to
were
that?
people rehearsing, so when we gave these assignments to them, which is a way for them to learn about Bill's vocabulary, movement vocabulary, and to learn about the company's history, because each movement phrase is connected to a piece. And so they would watch the piece, and then we'll talk about it. And then a lot of times we're just talking about how they were feeling. Are you okay? Especially when after Breonna Taylor, George Floyd were killed, it was a very traumatic time. And so we would meet on Zoom, we would assign them phrases, they would film themselves doing the phrase. Sometimes it's in their bedroom, sometimes it's on their rooftop, and then we would, I would put together these little videos and we posted them on Instagram. That's how we maintain our presence in the world as a company. But we were very lucky to have this commission so that we can actually come back together in person, weekly tests, COVID tests. And we were rehearsing in the Armory, huge space, safe, much safer than rehearsing in a studio. So in that sense, the pandemic was with us the whole time. Just people didn't dare ride the subway. They rode on bikes. I said, why are you all in such good shape? Or some form of shape after not seeing them for 6 months.
Right.
And they were riding bikes, they were running.
Well,
yeah.
I've yet to meet a dancer who is not in good shape, so.
Well, if you don't move for 6
months,
months,
maybe,
right?
maybe, right.
Yeah.
What does it feel like to perform in Minneapolis? given that this is the site of the murder of Mr. George Floyd.
When did we go? When did we go to the memorial?
On
Was 2 days?
Tuesday.
On Tuesday, we went to, the company took a field trip to the George Floyd Memorial, and we got to meet Miss Angela, who is George's aunt, as well as get a tour by the caretaker of the grounds, Janelle.
She's the director of the foundation, of the George
Director.
Floyd Global Memorial Foundation.
Thank you for that. And knowing we were going there, I already went with an open heart, I guess you can say. And then being at the space, seeing the ground in which George was murdered, it's a visceral feeling. And I'm sure you all who are here have, if you have been there, you have experienced this too. The visceral feeling of the people who were also around us, Janelle and Miss Angela speaking of their truth and their story. And all of that is in the air, processing in the body, in the mind, the heart, the spirit. So going into rehearsal that evening, going into the shows the next day, felt like I wouldn't say a response, but a continual processing of the emotions of that tour. To answer your question, it's something that continues to resonate, I think, in me as a performer, that it is, much like we're talking in this discussion already, how the context, emotion, experience, the day, it's not necessarily literally presented and expressed in the body in my performance, but it informs my performance. My feelings, my emotions, they manifest in my body in a certain way that that bring that truth, like that bring my truth into the performance. So there is this deeper feeling of emotion. There is this deeper sharing of emotion that is happening here without me being able to articulate in the proper words, because I think the truth is here. The truth is in the way that I look into the eyes of my audience. The truth is in the way that I look into the eyes of my colleagues performing. The tears that are falling in my colleagues' eyes that we're all bearing witness to, and that you sitting in the audience are also bearing witness to. I mean, it is a body language. It is the feeling of emotion that is resonating in this time. That
And there's
yeah.
parts of the performance that are strictly choreographed, is my understanding. But as
Yes.
a performer, there are some aspects of it where you have the ability to have your own agency within. So that could be impacted by how you're feeling within that respective day. And
I think a lot of it is how the materials are arranged, how the phrases are arranged. Those are set, right? Where they are in space, in almost every section, every moment, except if you are assigned certain places to go, is their choice. So every day you'll see a different performance. And I've been to Minneapolis many times. I've been to Northrop a couple of times, to Walker at McGuire a couple of times. But it's coming back this time, knowing what the city has been through. It feels very different. It feels like I don't take it lightly. We don't take it lightly to be in this place and sharing this work with the Minneapolis audience. And being at the memorial, it was, I don't have words for that at the moment, but like Marie's saying, I think for the musicians as well as for the dancers, it becomes part of them. That experience becomes part of them, and if we're lucky, it will become part of us forever. This feeling and experience, and it becomes part of our art. And it was so touching to see the memorial. It was, on the one side you have Mark Zuckerberg talking about metaverse and virtual bodies and whatever, and then you have here the community taking care of this memorial and resisting the government. Every roadblock you put in there, they put art on it. And the flowers, the planters, they were building a greenhouse. The carpenter and the electrician were building a greenhouse to put the planters in there for the winter, to winterize the memorial. This is face-to-face, this is real, this is in person, this is hands, DIY, love, community care, and then there is the metaverse. So it's jarring for me to think about both worlds coexisting, but they do.
Thank you.
I don't think that we knew that this would be possible, that we would be, in making this piece, that we were going to be here to perform. I mean, that dawned on me.
Thank you for bringing us.
I mean, and what that means, right? And having that opportunity to see a world where the community can help heal. And I think what Janelle was saying is that there was a lot of negotiations and getting this, what was the term? Was it progressive renewal or something about how they handle anything, and dissent in general, with community, with solidarity, peacefully, and what that does as a result. And as a performer, to be here in this space, I can only speak of my own personal experience, but I'm so grateful. I mean, it gives me purpose in a way that, as a musician, as an artist, I mean, you always feel like you're doing something, hopefully for the better, for the good, but there's no way I could have dreamt that this is where we would be right now. And to experience this space and to heal together, to just like, for, I don't know, how long is it, like 60 some minutes to be in this moment together, and to come out of it, we are changed.
Right.
Right? So.
Well, let's go back to sort of just creating this, because this piece you were working on, I think it was the Deep Blue Sea, that gets shelved. You're not sure what's going to happen next. I think Bill said in some interview that I read that he thought 10 days he could come up. Is that true?
He thought, in a couple of months we'll be out back on the street. Little did we know that, we have to adjust our whole lives and we're still wearing masks. Look at that. Yep.
Right. So when you're thinking about the audience and how the dancers are going to move around and the musicians, what was the thought process of structuring what it would look like on stage and placement?
Well, I hope you all get to come to see the show. There's a center performance area, and there are these pathways that we call rivulets, and then there's a periphery. The audience are interspersed around the space, so that you're very immersed in the work. At the Armory, this huge space, the rivulets were there to create intimacy, so that if you have a seat way out there, someone is actually dancing nearby. You have access to the performers. So you don't have to look, 300 feet, 200 feet over there to see anyone. And we were socially distanced always, and we always wear masks. It was the very first time we had an audience at the Armory. It took 30 minutes for them to for the audience to enter the space. Everyone was socially distanced. The usher would get tested first. they waited outside. The test result came back in, every audience member, and the usher would bring in one section in a socially distanced line. You sit here, you sit here, you sit here. All the seats were 11 feet apart. And then there is a moat between the performer and the audience. And then sometimes when we are in rehearsal, I'm giving a note to Marie, and someone would say to me, socially distanced, please, 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart.
Holding a stick.
And then they'll say, okay, that section of the dance, these performers are too close together. We actually have a section called, what do you call this? Patty cake. We actually have to do it distance. Air patty cake, yeah. Yeah. No, they were doing the hand clap. But yeah. So yeah, the piece was very much conceived as a socially distanced piece. And it continues to be, but now in a smaller space, the audience is so close to you. We were actually afraid of hitting them. We had to adjust some of the movement so as not to kick someone or whack someone in the head.
Right.
But the beauty of the smaller space is that you feel them breathe, you feel their heartbeat, you see the sweat down their face, and you are even more immersed.
The idea of audience as conductor, depending on where they're kind of looking out in the performance at the Park Avenue Armory, how has that kind of continued forward? Within that little clip that you showed, I could look back, but then I would miss sort of what you were doing right in front of me, right? Can you talk a little bit about the thought process that went into that?
That's kind of like life in general. When you're going down the street, you can choose to look right. Oh, a mother and a child. Oh, cute guy over there. So it's kind of like that. You choose what you want to see in life, as opposed to, a film director editing the certain frame for you to look at. So that's up to you. At the end of the show, you may come up with a completely different version of Afterwardsness. I was following Marie the whole time, and her room was right next to me, and then I became attached to her. So I kind of like that idea that you have your own version of the work, that you make that choice to see, and then, you know what, we miss things in life. We can't have everything. Come back and sit from another, and also where you sit is so different. If you're sitting right at the edge of the center area, you may miss a lot of things that are happening behind you.
And one of the passages within the clip, and I would say powerful emotion for myself as well, is where the dancer is on the ground, he's rolling over, and then his hands are in a position which would create an impression that he is being handcuffed or under police control. How did that weave itself within the creation of this piece?
Or you want to talk about that?
Sure. We were looking for a transition between two major phrases, or two parts of the piece. And I remember Bill giving us a task, showing, was it like 5 transitional movements?
There were 5 movements, 5 shapes on the floor.
5 shapes on the
5
floor.
shapes or gestures on the floor that can look like shielding, can look like hands being bound behind your back, and you, as a performer, can choose to perform them in any area while traveling to your spot. And it was, it came at the end of a section that was taken from a piece called Last Supper at Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Promised Land.
Right.
And it was given to 2 Black women in the company, and he wanted to bring in, and that's a kind of historical reference, and we deconstructed the song Eliza Jane, and we created this cacophony, knowing that we want to lead to this song called Another Man Done Gone that you heard a little bit of in the video, that Marie is now singing because Vincent has since left the company. And that is probably the most narrative moment in the piece, because there is that specificity of language. There are the bodies on the floor. The lyrics in the song is Another Man Done Gone. I didn't know his name. He had a long chain on. This is verse by verse. And they killed another man. And of course, doing that section in Minneapolis has a whole different meaning to that section. So those shapes, we didn't want it to be too overly dramatic, so sometimes Bill would say, okay, let's tone it down and don't dramatize it, just distill the shapes. Let the audience do the work. Let the moment and the lights and the sound do the work. We don't have to dramatize the already dramatic song. And that song leads into Pauline's composition, that improvisation that she was talking about. So that whole section sits in the middle of the piece. And in fact, we stop everything, almost everything, and Pauline plays.
Right.
And then the earth, the world, wakes up again. Slightly different. Yeah.
I think it speaks to what we were talking about earlier of how the movement, gesture, skeleton can create story when the audience sees, or when there's a certain perspective or a lens put on it. I think the 5 gestures that we made that locomote this particular mover to his spot, it's also the sound in the air and what just happened before that also informs what this person's doing now and the story that that specific body is telling.
And Kevin, do you remember in the video, the dancers came in banging pots and pans? Yeah. So I don't know if you guys did it here in Minneapolis, but in the first, 6 months of the pandemic, every night at 7 p.m. in New York City, we would bring our pots and pans out on the street and bang it in honor of the essential workers.
We ring bells out of our windows, and Janet plays one of those bells.
Okay. and also at the end, each dancer has their own room, while Pauline plays the very last Messiaen movement. That's created by them. That's something that Bill said we have to reference the rooms that they were isolated in during the pandemic. So each person has their own room, and what was the task for that?
Finding activities that we did during the pandemic
Exactly.
and putting it into the room,
and
contextualizing it.
Exactly, making movement out of, sometimes it's literally sitting, and sometimes they are running, jumping rope, or I don't know, masturbating. Sorry, I'm in school. Yeah. So that all became part of the piece, and they own that. It is theirs. Yeah.
Okay. Question coming in from the audience. 10,000 Things Theater Company, and I think Wonderlust as well, here in Minneapolis, perform sometimes without a stage, very low tech, very similar to Afterwardsness. Do you see this as a trend or something that the company might do more of?
Bill actually loves the idea of performing in an intimate space, in immersive work, so that may continue. It's hard. Well, we do have a lot of tech at Northrop. There's so many lights being hung and in the air and focus that took a very, very long time. We could have done this piece with nothing, but you will have a very different experience. I think the challenge for traditional presenters, Northrop gave us the opportunity to perform on their stage. If we were in a warehouse, which it was discussed in the beginning, we would have a much more difficult time doing what we're doing. Bill wants the immersive feeling, but he also wants all the design, so it's a little bit tricky. And at the same time, it's hard for presenters if you are part of a season and you're required to sell, 1,200 seats. And on the stage, you can only seat 100 people, 120 people or so. So it financially is not viable sometimes, depending on, what presenter you're talking to.
Okay. Question from the audience. What led you to use dance as a means of expression, or I could also alter this question, using music as a means of expression? But I'll start with you first.
I think dance is my truth. The way I express and communicate most easily is with my body, and how processing the present, processing my past is through my body, and dance comes most easily in that sense.
There are just some things that words can't express. I do better by sound and by time and space. And so that's my form of expression in the same way that movement and dance might be for a performer like Marie. I think ever since I was a child. I mean, I try to write, and it's really hard, and it takes me a gazillion times longer to write what I'm really trying to say. But through music, I feel like an immediate connection with who I'm performing for.
Okay. Janet, you want to weigh in at all?
I'm retired.
I thought she said she was playing something. Didn't Pauline say that? I think she did.
She plays
Yeah.
in the piece. Yes.
Oh, I
very-
play a bell. I'm part of the
Yes,
orchestra.
she's performing on the bell and the clicker, and it's all.
I'm part of the cacophony at the end. Not cacophony. I'm part of the soundscape at the end. I play like a little bell.
It's like one of my favorite moments. I wait for it every night.
Sometimes I forget to get up off my seat to go to that station.
I'm watching, listening.
I'm taking notes, so I'm watching the dance every night. I'm taking notes, and I go,
Literally giving breath cues, right, to like every single step.
So a question from the audience. This form of dance isn't just for people who've been educated in dance history. It's for everyone, quote unquote, blue collar folks.
absolutely.
Okay.
Don't come with your preconceived ideas. Just kidding.
I think
Anyone
this
can
piece
walk,
is
yeah.
very accessible to
Yeah.
anybody and everyone. There's relationship and relatability, I think, and that is worked into the piece and lives inherently in the piece.
Yeah, you know, I tell people, don't try to explain or understand what you just saw. Let it marinate in you, and maybe if it stays with you the next morning over coffee, we may have done the right thing. I know I've had an angry student come at me and say, I have to write a paper on this. I don't understand a thing. I said, okay, calm down.
So,
Not in Minneapolis, another state. Yeah.
No, not on the University of Minnesota campus. We're coming to the end here. I'll make a last call if folks want to send a question in for the audience. One of the things I was struck by the statement that was made to Bill on sort of like challenging this particular point in time on what I sometimes refer to as racial reckoning or conciliation. The dance world, the art world, all are part of this white supremacist patriarchal system, and we should not be a part of it. We should challenge it. We should push beyond. Do you see that tension as a multiracial dance company? And by the way, it's not just been doing it for the last couple of years. At its inception, it was 40 years ago. How do you see the dance company in the space at this time?
I find myself, okay, I do not want to answer for Bill.
Just for you.
And it's also a very challenging moment. I find that discourse, nuanced discourse, is quite rare and seldom. And if I disagree with whatever someone's saying, I may be called a Republican. So I find myself censoring myself and waiting to see what company I'm in. I feel like there's, sometimes I ask, where's kindness, where's respect, where is, I don't know what. So, and I find that the lack of nuance in discourse, is it the fault of social media? Is it the fault of Twitter, where we are expected to, obliged to express complex thought in 280 characters? There's no way you can be nuanced in that. And is it because we just came out of 4 years of Trump and it still continues? So right now, I am kind of lost. There are moments where I feel like, this is hopeful. This is, I feel, and also coming out of a year and a half of not coming out, we're still there. Pandemic, we're on Zoom. We only see our avatars. We behave poorly on social media. We do not express this, human to human connection. And I know kids who live in the VR world and have to be coerced to go and play in the playground. So I am kind of confused and lost at this moment, and I'm struggling and fighting for live performance, for this connection that we have, this community that we built, that come together to share one experience. That does not answer your question.
No, I think that it did. I love the answer. And I understand that there's a show tonight. Is that correct?
There is a show tonight.
Okay, so we should probably wrap up so you can get to that. But before we do, Pauline, thank you so much for what you said and shared here. Marie, as well, thank you. And Janet, really appreciate putting and framing it for us, and really appreciate the work that you have done and continue to do now with the Arnie Zane, Bill T. Jones, New York. How long does that go?
Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company, New York Live. Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company celebrating its 40th anniversary next year. The New York Live Arts is in its 10th anniversary season. So it's a season of anniversaries. So check it out, our website. Yeah.
Please help me thank our guests today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin.